Hello, welcome to Meet the Thriller Author, a podcast that features interviews with authors of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense novels. My name is Alan Petersen, and I am your host. I am also an author of thrillers, and that is why when I decided to start a podcast where I would be interviewing fellow authors, I decided to focus on the genre that I write in and that I love, which is the thriller genre. And for simplicity's sake, by thrillers here, I'm talking about books that you would find in Amazon's mystery, thriller, and suspense category, as well as its subcategories of crime fiction, such as police procedurals, psychological thrillers, espionage, those type of novels. These are the authors that you'll be meeting during this podcast. Okay, so with that out of the way, stay tuned for the latest episode of Meet the Thriller Author. Hey everybody, this is Alan Petersen with Meet the Thriller Author, and in this episode I have a special guest with me here, Jeff Menapace, who writes horror thrillers like the Bad Games. I've been reading it, and it's very scary. Jeff, are you there, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm here.
That's pretty cool, man. Jeff, thanks for coming on the show. For our listeners who haven't heard about you or have read your books before, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Let's see. Writers are pretty boring. That's why we write. We try to sound more interesting than we are. I don't know. I guess I'm 42, married, no kids, 2 cats, born in Pennsylvania, born and raised in Pennsylvania, near the Philadelphia area. Currently live in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which I don't know if you saw the movie Signs with M. Night Shyamalan. You know what I'm talking about? The guy who did Sixth Sense.
Sixth Sense, yep.
Yeah, that was filmed around here. Like I said, my life is the life of a writer is not very glamorous. So as you can see, I'm sitting here in an undershirt. I don't know if you can see, in a baseball cap. So, like I said, the stuff we write about is far more interesting than who we are.
Yeah, I like what you said, though. That's why we do it, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we live vicariously through our characters.
And so, for someone who hasn't read your books, can you tell us a little bit about the type of books that you write?
You know, you kind of summed it up well when you said that I wrote horror thrillers. I've never been, the terminologies nowadays, horror, thriller, suspense, mystery, they're so broad. They were far more definitive, I think, back in the day. Mm-hmm. It's tough to, now it's, a thriller. Horror can encompass a lot. I was always of the belief that horror was more of like the supernatural, the paranormal, monsters, vampires, demons, all that stuff. And whereas thriller, it could be very dark, but as long as it didn't cross that into that supernatural line, it was still a thriller. But then you've got those gray areas like, my favorite film, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Nothing supernatural there, but most people would say that's a horror film, right?
Oh yeah. One of my favorites as well.
Yeah, so, I don't know. But I tend to like to write. I like to think of myself as a guy that writes about things that I believe that could happen and that are scary. I don't really believe in ghosts or demons or monsters. But I do believe that if I was out in the sticks and my car broke down and a truck full of dudes drove up and said, "Hey, boy, you need a lift," I would be terrified, So, you got a pretty mouth, all that stuff. So that's the kind of stuff that I find terrifying, things that could really happen in real life. And that's what I try to write about. I try to write really real characters that experience horrific situations that could occur in everyday life,
Yeah, I just started reading your book, and then you remind me of Blake Crouch, like his some of his standalones, the evil that people do.
Yeah, I've been very honored and flattered to hear that. Blake Crouch is of course awesome, and I've heard his Pines books are more supernatural, but I've heard that a lot of his standalone stuff like Run and Abandon and stuff like that I've not read them. I've heard they're awesome. They're on my must-read list, of course. I've got a must-read list, a mile high. But yeah, I've heard that, and I was very flattered.
Checking out on your website, you said that Bad Games has been optioned for a film.
Yeah, all 3 of them actually. Because the Bad Games, there's Bad Games, Vengeful Games, and Hellbent. It's a trilogy. Didn't start out that way, but ended up being 3 books, and I got lucky. I was a producer, a guy who did some of the Halloween films. He did Haunting in Connecticut. He did I think he did one of the Paranormal Activities. I can't remember. He's pretty well. Certainly, he's done his thing. So he contacted me out of the blue. He was sitting, like, I think he was in a waiting room, and he was playing on his phone, and he saw Bad Games and liked the blurb, liked the cover. There's a hint right there how important a good cover is, and read the blurb and started reading it, and then he contacted me the next day and said, "These would make great films. Would you be interested?" So.
Oh, that's awesome! Yeah. That's some resume that he has. All those movies that you mentioned.
Yeah. I was, because at first I've been contacted by people before, and a lot of times it's a guy who just got out of film school. He's startup stuff, which of course I always say, yeah, go crazy. I don't, it's fine, but when this guy contacted me, of course, I was apprehensive. Like, all right, well, yeah, let me get back to you before I sign anything. I looked him up, and it seems like, he was legit. So, he sent over the contracts, and we optioned all three, and now we're just, crossing our fingers, hoping that somebody wants to dump a lot of money into it and make them into movies.
Oh, yeah, that's cool, man. And you mentioned your covers. Yeah, they are awesome. They really grab you, especially if you like if you go through Amazon quickly. It's like boom. I was like, ooh, that looks cool.
Yeah, I have who's himself is an amazing writer. A guy named Keelan Patrick Burke. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. Mm-mm. He is a fantastic. He's a multiple Bram Stoker Award winner. Awesome horror writer, and he also happens to do covers. And out of the blue, I read one of his books that I really liked called Kin, and asked him, and then I said, "Who did your cover, by the way?" And he said, "I did." And so, you want to do mine? And he did. He's a good cover designer.
Why are you writing thrillers and horror thrillers? Is that a genre that you liked before you started to write?
Oh yeah. It's pretty much what I read. I tend to emulate what you like, right? I love mystery. I love thriller, suspense, horror. When it comes to reading and film, I love psychological stuff. I get really into a lot of the, even though my books have violence in them, I never try to get gratuitous with it. I like to imply it, but I've never been I don't like the gore, the over the top. I mean, it's fun. Mm-hmm. I mean, if those are your expectations going in, but I like the more of the psychological effect, and the kind of stuff like, sometimes, if you ever read a book and you can't stop thinking about it days after, or, stuff like that. So that's usually the angle I always try to go for. And therefore, what I've read, what I try to emulate,
Yeah, well, that's like you mentioned the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original version. I mean, it's got some gory parts, but really it's not that gory. It's just scary as hell. Like when he's running around with a chainsaw. That's what scares you more than anything.
It's so funny you say that. I've probably said that I lost count how many times I've said that to people. Because right away people hear the title and they think of Leatherface and they think, oh, it's gross and blah, blah, blah. I said, watch the movie. It's terrifying, but there's practically zero blood and gore in that film.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great example of a film that's so terrifying that you think you saw it, but you didn't, because it's so heavily implied and it's so well done, and Yeah.
And so how long have you been writing?
My whole life. I can remember being a little kid and always writing stories, and I used to like to draw a lot. I always write little captions or stories to go with my drawings. I only got really into it as far as trying to make sense of them. I guess when I got into middle school, high school, that's when I started, getting more serious about it. Never thought I'd be able to make a living doing it, but I've been writing my whole life.
And how many books do you have published out now?
I have 6 novels done that are out there, and then a whole bunch of short stuff. The short stuff, most of it is available in a collection I have called Warped. Some of it's old, some of it's I've still got some new stuff out there I'm still trying to get it all together into one collection, but right now 6 novels, and lots more to come.
Oh, and you said that the bad games and vengeful games, is that the same characters in those three novels?
Oh yeah. When I first decided I wanted to be a writer, I was very lucky. I was able to find an agent, and I sent him Bad Games, which at the time was not called Bad Games. It went through a lot of titles. Originally, it was called, I think it was Malevolent, and I sent it to him, and he got back to me and said he loved it, and wanted to take me on board. So I was over the moon because it's not easy getting an agent, and he asked for a sequel, and I'd had a sequel in mind. Wasn't really sure if I was going to do it or not. So I wrote the sequel while we were still waiting, because he said a sequel, obviously 2 books would work better at pitching it to a potential publisher. And I finished with the second one, and by that time he said, "You think you can write a third?" And by that time I was done. I'm like, no, they're all dead. Everyone's done. Forget it. It's over. And I eventually became an indie. We parted ways on good terms. He was a good guy, but things just didn't work, and I ended up going the indie route. And people really liked Bad Games, did really well, and people liked Vengeful Games. And by then I thought, all right, well now I got to write a third one. And I had no idea what I was going to do. No idea. But I finally did it. But and when the third one was done, I said, that is it. There's no freaking way. Now I have been flirting with the idea of doing a fourth one.
Oh, close. The readers will be happy to hear that.
Yeah, I don't know. I have ideas right now. I'm playing around with ideas. Nothing definitive yet, but there's a good possibility.
So where do you get your ideas from?
I don't know. I've always been a weird kid. I've always had a very, very vivid imagination. I tend to look at things and envision. Some people might see like a guy just crossing the road, and my mind flashes on the guy crossing the road, and then suddenly a car screeches by and yanks him into the car, and the car drives away and then dumps his body down the street. And I don't know. My mind's constantly going. It's why I don't sleep well. A lot of it was best said, I think, in Stephen King's book on writing. I don't know if you ever read it.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Oh my gosh, it's brilliant. It's not only the first half is great. It's like a curriculum vitae of his life, which is a very amusing read. And then the second half, he talks about his opinion on what you should and shouldn't do. And it's, even if you're not a writer, I recommend everyone read it. But he says he gets a lot of his ideas from what he calls what if situations. Mm-hmm. Which I think is a great. I would agree that mine's similar. His thing. What if vampires invaded a New England town? Salem's Lot, or what if a crazed fan held a popular writer captive? Misery. So he comes up with these what if, and they happen to him all at random times when he's going for walks in the car, taking a shower. Same thing here.
Do you ever base any of your writing on real events, and go off from there?
You mean like stuff in the headlines?
Yeah, like you see something in the news and you go, "Oh, what if?" And then you start.
Yeah, I would say there's influences, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I have a weird fascination with serial killers, and by no means, by the way, I need to clarify this. By no means am I praising them or deifying them in any way like some wackos do. I am just saying I've always had an interest in them. Mm-hmm. So needless to say, researching them historically, what they do, I use a lot of that in my stuff. And like you said, current events, it influenced. I actually wrote a book that I ended up not publishing because it involved school shootings. Mm. And I just, with what was going on at the time, I just figured it's far too sensitive a subject. So
yeah. You think you'll ever revisit that one again, or is that pretty?
Well,
Leave it
it
alone?
was probably for the best because I did actually go back and reread it, and it was pretty bad. So
That makes it easier to move on.
yeah, it was a blessing in disguise. Yeah, so I'm pretty glad I didn't put that out.
Yeah. So what is it? Are any of your real life any part of you is make it to your characters in your books?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I would wager. Gosh, I mean, every writer, I think it's unavoidable. You inject yourself into at least one character or another in your writing. You know, how can you not? Whether it's in your dialogue or the decision making, but I don't deliberately do it. I mean, like I said, I think it's something that, I mean, could inadvertently happen. I mean, I know a lot of times when I think of like, how couples interact or how people talk to one another, like two buddies would talk, I try to reflect on how I would talk to my buddies, like if we're at a bar having a beer or whatever. Or actually, one of the complaints, if I could go back and make changes to the first Bad Games book, one of the complaints I had was that the couple, Amy and Patrick, were far too affectionate. And I must have like at least 500 reviews of people saying good book, but I couldn't stand the two main characters' affection for one another. And and it was funny though, because at the time I was writing it, and I think about it now the way I am with my wife, and we're like that with each other, and don't get me wrong, I mean, we drive each other nuts just as much, but I never call her name's Kelly. I never call her Kelly. I call her honey or baby or sweetie or whatever. And if I do call her Kelly, she looks at me fun. Like it's like when your parents use your full name.
Yeah.
Jeffrey. And it's like, what I do? So I try to, the flirty way you sometimes talk to your mate, and I tried to dump that into the book, and I think it was a good example of how real life sometimes doesn't work on the written page as well.
Yeah.
So I would have, if I ever have the chance to go back and do like a second edition, I think I would. Kelly and I call it like the schmoopiness.
Yeah, Seinfeld.
Seinfeld, right? Schmoopy. I think I would clean up the schmoopiness a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are some of the challenges when you're writing? Like when you start writing the writing process?
Well, honestly, the discipline to just stay on track. Well, actually, no, that's not, because once you get into it, you lose. The world goes away, and you're really into it. The challenge is, you know what it is? It's keeping your regular life in order. I can't speak for all writers, but I would imagine a lot of them are pretty eccentric, and I'm no exception. I think my biggest challenge is whenever I get really into a story, and I'm really deep into the book that I'm working on, I forget everyday life. I forget to eat, to bathe, to pay attention to my wife, to do household things that chores, stuff that you need to be doing. I think that's the biggest challenge. I mean, if it was up to me, I would lock myself in a room and not come out until the book was done.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest challenge. I mean, of course, there's other like technical things. When you get writer's block and you come up with like find plot holes, or you're stuck on what the character should do next. I mean, those are all part of the writing process. But as far as the challenge of beginning or working on a project, I would say it's keeping a balance of your job and your life in order.
And when you write, where do you usually do it?
In my office, I have a little. I have a room upstairs where it's my domain. I get in there and shut the door, and then just go to work. Try to keep it quiet.
And do you use Word or a writing software?
I use Word.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, what's your writing process like then? Are you do you plot a lot, or you just kind of just go for it?
No, I'm not really big into plotting. I'm more of I'm definitely a note scratcher.
Mm-hmm.
If you went into my office right now, it would look like a bomb went off. I mean, there's just papers with no one, even the best detectives probably wouldn't be able to piece anything together. I mean, it's only chicken scratch that I can make. I'm constantly, like I said, I don't sleep very well. So 2 a.m. I'll think, oh, this should happen, and I'll reach over and grab my phone and I'll send a text to my email of a note that I want to add to the story. I tend to once again, you remember on writing, Stephen King's book, and he said something great where he said he looks at the story as an artifact that you get out of the ground, and you bring it up too fast, you lose a lot of pieces of it. But if you do it slowly, meaning like you just kind of you start slowly and you develop a rapport with the characters. You take it day to day, and it's been my experience that works good for me too. And the analogy I use is the tried and true of taking it tree by tree. Mm-hmm. Because I find that if I think of the whole forest, like when I look at past books I've done and I flip through 400-page books, and I'm thinking, how the hell did I do this? Oh, Jesus, I'll never be able to do this again. And because you tend to forget like all the painstaking chapter after chapter that went into that. Now you just look at the finished product, and so no book has ever ended or began the way I always intended it to. I mean, I'll try to write outlines or ideas, but usually something ends up changing. So I tend to write, I guess, from the hip would be the best explanation. Mm-hmm. I have a general idea of where I want it to go. Sometimes it kind of goes in that direction, but more often not, it kind of detours.
And so, what gets you to put in the time to write? Is it the
discipline? Yeah. It's not a difficult job because I love it so much. Mm-hmm. If I hated it, it would be, it would be hard. But there are still days when you're just, the last thing you want to do is write, because those tend to be the days when you're just not feeling it or you're blocked. And I think the most important, the most important aspect, and I'm still guilty of not following this rule, but is to just develop a routine and structure and just stick to it. Even if you're just having one of those days where you feel like you couldn't even spell your name, sit your butt down and just, even if the writing is just god awful, you can always go back and edit it. And it's especially tough nowadays because you got like all these distractions. You got friggin' social media, and you got Netflix, and you got your Xbox, and I got two crazy cats always running around, and again, like I said, right at the click of your fingertips, I could just go, oh, what's going on Facebook, or oh, let's see if I got any more email, or
Yeah.
So it's tough, man. It requires a lot of that discipline,
Do you try to shut off your internet and stuff when you're writing?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I turn off my phone. I'll shut my door. My office door, which usually works, but like I said, I have two cats and they're nuts. They're very cool cats. They love to be with me, and they want to both sit on my lap when I work. And I don't know if you like cats or if you've ever had one, but the whole sitting on your lap while you're trying to work thing doesn't work because they want to help you.
Yeah.
So I end up booting them out and shutting the door, and so yeah, it's tough, man. It's like, you just gotta just get up. In a perfect world, I would wake up, go downstairs, put on a pot of coffee, go back upstairs, and get my targeted number of words. I always shoot for anywhere between 2,000 to 4,000 words a day. I'm a slow writer. I'm not a fast writer. And then once that's done, then go and do the marketing stuff and whatever. But it doesn't always happen. But that's what I shoot for.
And how many? You say you put out like one book a year, or?
No, I try not to. I'm slow. I don't know. I mean, if there was one thing I could change about myself, I wish I was more prolific. I wish I was a faster writer. I'm not a fast writer. I see some of these guys who are cranking out a book every 2 to 3 months. Yes. I don't know how the hell they do it. I don't know. I don't know how they do it. I mean, and I'm talking about good books. I mean, obviously you can crank out a book if every couple of months if it sucks. But I mean, I'm talking like good books. I mean, there's some guys out there who can do it. I don't know how they do it. If it was up to me, in a perfect world, I'd put out about 2 books a year, 2, maybe 3, maybe on a good day, But like I said, I'm my own worst enemy. I'm very critical of my own work, so I tend to do a lot of revision.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it happens to me too. Sometimes the rewriting and revision takes longer. Sometimes I was like, I got to cut that down.
Well, the hardest part is the revision can be fun. The hardest part is, and I'm sure you can relate. It's trying to ignore the temptation to revise your first draft while you're in process of writing it. That's the hardest part for me. I want to. I mean, your first draft, again, there are exceptions to the rule, but most often first drafts are pretty crappy. But the whole goal is you're dumping your head onto the written page, and then once it's all out there, then you can start fine tuning it and doing your thing. But what I struggle not to do is to constantly go back on that first draft and make changes, and then before you know it, you're never getting the damn first draft finished.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
So what are you working on now? What are you writing now?
I'm actually I'm working on several things right now at once, which is both good and bad. It means that I have a lot of irons in the fire, but it also means that my productivity is going to suffer because of it. And for that, I mean simply because you generally work best when you're only focused on one project. I mean, it's very difficult, especially if you get really into the mindset of your characters and the plot. I mean, again, there are guys out there who can switch it on and off, go from one to the other, and just I don't know how they do it. I get absorbed to the point where, my wife will be talking to me and I'm looking at her with a glazed face because I'm still thinking about what I wrote earlier, So, and incidentally, she doesn't like that.
Are you thinking about killers?
Yeah, right. But what I'm working on is my next release is going to be a post-apocalyptic thriller. The last book I released was more of a mystery, an FBI thriller called Side Effects, and because I wanted to really expand my genre. I think as any creative person, whether you're an artist or a musician or a painter, sculptor, writer, you're always looking to just expand and try new genres and try new things. And I was getting a little annoyed because I was getting lumped in with a lot of like ultra horror stuff, and I don't consider my stuff hardcore horror. I think of it as thrillers that are just a little on the dark side. So I wanted to write something that was still a little creepy, but a bit more mainstream. So I started trying to get more into the mystery thriller, and then I wanted to try something else. So the next book I'm finishing up now is a post-apocalyptic thriller. And I'm actually co-authoring with my sister. She's a librarian at the Free Library in Philadelphia, and she's a really good writer. So we're working on that one together. And then after that, I've got 2 or 3 others that are in maybe about, each one is about 5 chapters deep. And those are more back to my bad games roots, bad stuff happening to good people.
Do you try to focus, like if you're writing one on one day, or just focus on that one?
That's a good question. I don't know.
You figure it out.
I really should focus. You know what I tend to do? I tend to pick one that has priority over the others. I was kind of pleased. The one I just mentioned, the mystery one, the thriller, the FBI thriller. It received initially. It received lukewarm reviews and from my fan base, and I think it was simply because it was different than that tends to happen. It's like when J.K. Rowling wrote something that wasn't Harry Potter, people were no, it was Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And people say, oh yeah, it was good, but it wasn't as exciting as Bad Games, or it wasn't as dark as Wildlife, or it wasn't as, and I get that, but it sells pretty well. So I really like the character, so I'm actually working on a sequel to that.
Yeah, your Amazon reviews are really good on it. I just took a look.
Yeah, I mean, people are digging it. They're like, I mean, it's nice because they say it's a good read. I don't think it's what people are expecting. Like I said, if you go from Bad Games or Wildlife or Hair of the Bitch or whatever, which are dark books, going like, that was cool, blah blah blah. Well, what's this new one? Side Effects. You're probably gonna be disappointed a little because it's a completely different kind of book. So it's one like the Bad Games, those kind of books you read with like a shot of whiskey, whereas the Side Effects you read with maybe like a cup of tea.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good description.
Yeah. So yeah, working on a lot of things right now.
And do you still find time to read, or are you too busy now to?
Yes and yes. I do try. What I actually do is, obviously I love to read. A lot of times, unfortunately, my work prevents me from reading as much as I'd like. What I do a lot of times when I'm really into something that like really in the middle of a piece of work, I like to reread favorites of mine because I tend to be very superstitious. And I always worry that if I pick up a new book and it stinks, that somehow it's going to rub off on me and it's going to make my work stink. And by the way, when I say something stinks, I'm certainly no critic. It's just my opinion. If I personally did not care for it, I worry that somehow it's going to be stuck in my mind and then somehow it's going to affect my writing. So a lot of times when I'm in the middle of working on something, I don't really want to be distracted. So I'll pick up one of my favorites, and I'll just reread my favorite parts, and just really appreciate the writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always a good motivator. I do the same thing. Like Silence of the Lambs is one I've
just gonna mention.
Yeah, that's
love that. Has so many. There are whole lines in that book that I have memorized that are just genius. I mean, that's one that I'm constantly picking up and rereading.
Yeah. So how are you active with are you on social media? You're on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff?
Yeah. I try to be really, really interactive with my readers, as much as I can, because number one, because I enjoy it, and number two, I'd be nothing without them.
Yeah. So
yeah, I mean, there's no greater feeling. I mean, it's nice to be recognized by your peers, but it's just such a lovely feeling, waking up to like emails, people saying, oh, I just finished, hey, Mr. So-and-so, I just read your book and finished Bad Games, and oh man, I was up till 4 a.m. finishing it, and it was it. I mean, those just make your day, and that's who I write for. I mean, do I want to be like, a rich writer somewhere living out on my own island? Yeah, of course. Who wouldn't? But more than that, I want to write stuff where just people really enjoy it and have a good time. I'm not looking to be Mr. Fancy Pants and have a thesaurus on my lap and write all these crazy words. I want to tell a good story.
Yeah, for the listeners, I'll have links to your website, jeffmenapace.com, and your Twitter and everything on there, so they can go check it out.
Yeah, I have a Facebook page. have a personal page, and then I have the fan page. I'm pretty good about it. If you send me messages on my fan page, I'm pretty good about getting back to you, in a day or so. My website, jeffmenapace.com, which has a submission form where I can contact you there, or info@jeffmenapace.com. That's the email. You can contact me on there, which a lot of people do. Contact me through Twitter, which I'm pretty good at getting back. I have someone who handles most of my Twitter stuff, but I'm pretty, like, whenever a direct message comes to me, I'm pretty good at handling those. So usually you can usually find me one way or the other.
I see you have a Goodreads on your website. You're active on Goodreads?
I'm not as active on Goodreads as I probably should be. I kind of forget about it sometimes. Every blue moon, I'll click on it, and actually, it's funny you say that. I just clicked on it the other day by accident, and I think I was typing in Google, and Goodreads popped up instead. And someone had written a review for Hair of the Bitch, and it was a really cool review. It had like images and what do they call them? GIFs, GIFs, and pictures, and all this. It was like the coolest review I've ever seen. It was like a movie. I gotta stop by there. I sometimes I don't like visiting it because it's very review dominated, and I try not to read a lot of my reviews because they can be very depressing if you get bad ones. And I tend not to. Like I said, Goodreads is very review dominated. So, but yeah, I do go there as well.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way with Goodreads. I kind of just leave that for the readers because, it can be scary in there with all the reviews and stuff.
and people tend to be a little rougher there. I found, and
yeah, I don't want to tick them off. So
oh no, I never reply. I mean, that's rule number one. You never reply. But at the same time, I am human, and I don't like to hear people say like, this is a piece of shit. And so I'm like, oh, thanks.
All right. Well, is there anything else you want to say to our listeners before I let you go?
Buy my stuff.
Buy my stuff. Buy my stuff.
No, I just hopefully I answered your questions and I was informative enough. Like I said, I'm a writer, so I'm not the most interesting guy in the world. But I just, my ultimate goal, I say this at the end of my books, I always print the same thing. I said, my job is to entertain. I want a book you can take on a plane with you, take to the beach, in the doctor's office, in the waiting room. I want to entertain you, and I really, really hope that I do that. And always feel free to, if you have nice things to say, please feel free to reach out and contact me, and I'll do my best to get back to you. And I love you guys and gals, and without you, I wouldn't be able to do what I love for a living. So that's it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Meet the Thriller Author. You can learn more about this podcast and about future interviews over at the website at www.thrillingreads.com/podcast. And if you haven't done so yet, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. You can do it on Stitcher, or you can do it by email over at the website. I'd also like to invite you to join the mailing lists so you never miss an episode. And I'd also like to invite you to visit my author page at Facebook, Alan Petersen Books, and also my website, alanpetersen.com.